Welcome to Industrial Engineering 537, Large-Scale Systems. And today we're going to talk about, again, the class project. I realize I've discussed it on a couple of previous occasions, but I've gotten a couple of emails from students asking for some clarification, and I'm going to try to provide the same input to everyone. So hopefully I will have answered some of their questions that they posed on the email. And hopefully I'll have described for you what I'm expecting in the class project, and that will improve your efficiency on it. Then we're going to go back to systems dynamics again. Today we're going to be talking about stocks and flows. You recall last time we were talking system dynamics. It was into causal loop diagramming, and by this point you hopefully will have read Chapter 5. The material today is largely out of Chapter 6 in the text, so I encourage you to go through that. Then I'm going to get into the tutorial of the software that is available to you. It's in a sleeve at the back cover of your textbook. So I encourage you to take that package out, load it onto your machine, and there's a tutorial within that software package that I strongly encourage you to go through. That's by far and away your most effective way to learn how to run the software. That software essentially honors the spirit and intent of the materials that Sturman so eloquently provides in his text. Again, the causal loop diagramming in Chapter 5 and the stocks and flows in Chapter 6. Those are the places that you should be through this week. And you also should have your software loaded on your machine and have gone through some of the tutorial at least. So the class project, revisiting that. Once again, the objective is the management of the neo-Luddite radical behavior. I'm going to get a bit more definitive on that just a couple of slides from now, but that really is what this class project is all about, managing neo-Luddite radical behavior. You recall way back when in Module 1, that radical behavior was manifest in the form of the emplacement of improvised explosive devices, and the way we elected to manage it at that point was essentially to develop and deploy an IED detection system so we could alert passengers in the transportation system sufficiently far in advance that they could avoid damage or lethality from those IEDs. What I stressed at that point and throughout was really just treating a symptom, albeit a very important one. The detection of IEDs and those sort of things is clearly an important thing to do. But if we really want to get back at the system of systems, the complex systems, the emergent, and all those nice things, we really want to get back at the root cause of all those things being IEDs and the symptoms. It's going to take a deeper understanding and a more careful articulation, if you will, of how one properly manages that social movement, this neo-Luddism. So that's what this class project is about. I'm not saying we don't, in the class project, we ignore the detection system. That's still fair game. But hopefully at this point you're recognizing that there are far more potentially more important and effective things that we need to be doing in addition to simply detecting those improvised explosive devices. The approach that I'm suggesting, first of all, revisit those classical engineering stages and think in that context as you think about your class project. Admittedly, you won't be able to get into any details in the later stages, but clearly in the early stages, this class project should be very helpful, particularly in Stage 1, which was define the problem, and Stage 2, which was design the system solution. So I strongly encourage you to go back to your to your earlier lectures in the classical systems engineering and do due diligence on those stages, with, in particular, stages 1 and 2. I've encouraged you to, in the approach, to think about using this concept you were introduced called social movement theory. That's what the neo-Luddite movement is about. It can be characterized anyway in the context of social movement theory. This is a theory that's been around for some 50 plus years. It's been used by sociologists, by political scientists, by economists. A variety of folks have used this effectively. Excuse me. I've spoken with many of those people who are practitioners of SMT, have expert knowledge in it. The thing that's somewhat different and beyond the envelope, if you will, that we are doing here is we're bringing some rigor in a sense of analytics, in the sense of modeling and analysis. We're bringing that rigor to the problem, and that is atypical of the way social movement theory has been applied and is currently being applied. So we are forging some new ground in this area, and that's great. That's what this class project should be doing. I encourage you to think about not only reductionism, which is the standard way we approach problems through analysis, but to think about reverse reductionism. And we spent some time early talking about that or in an earlier lecture. It was also brought up again when Dr. Goldsmith talked about intelligent agents, and it's this reverse reductionism is akin to emergent behavior in intelligent agents. So think that thought, not just reductionism, that's fine, but think also about reverse reductionism in your class project. The other part of the approach is this federation of models and analysis tools. And what I've asked you to do there is essentially use more than one modeling tool in coming up with this approach that you're going to suggest in your class project and coming up with a solution to management of these neo-Luddite radical behaviors. So, for example, you now have been exposed to some 6 different modeling and analysis tools. The system of systems analysis tool set, the intelligent agents, the risk analysis, decision analysis, game theory, and we are now on to system dynamics. So some 6 different methodological approaches. What I'm asking you to do is pick at least 2 of those. More's okay, but at least 2 of them, and use them in your class project. And the federation, to me, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to hook these models together and the output from one is going to literally be input to the other in the software world, albeit that's fine if you want to take it there. That'd be wonderful. But what I'm looking for in this federation is indeed to be able to use the output of one of the modeling tools as input to the other, but not necessarily in an automatic sense. It's okay for the analyst, you the analyst, to stay in the middle of that. So you might run one tool, gain some insights, and use those insights in parameterizing or develop the input for the other tool. And that's fine. But nevertheless, somewhere in your class project, you have to clearly demonstrate you have indeed done this federation. So the expected results from our project is a portfolio of policy options that help solve this problem, the problems arising from the neo-Luddite aversion to technological progress. Now, you recall that the way the Luddism grew up initially a few hundred years ago was all about the objection that weavers had to the automatic looms that were putting them out of business. That philosophy about an aversion, if you will, to technological progress, has been with us ever since, and even before the neo-Luddite, the Luddite dynamic. It's around today. There are people today who have aversions to technological progress. So this is more than just a hypothetical, non-existent issue out there. If indeed we can come up with solutions to this problem, we are helping in a real social sense, which engineers should do. Come up with technical solutions that help enhance the quality of life of citizenry. We are helping in that regard. So this is an important problem for you to think carefully about. To reiterate now, the modeling and analysis tools that you've been exposed to, and you should include at least two of these. That's SOSAT, intelligent agents, risk analysis, decision analysis, game theory, and system dynamics. Now, it's not required, but I do strongly encourage you to use it, and I encourage it for two reasons. You have, in fact, been exposed to the first 5 on this list. You took an exam, and that exam had 5 problems on it, one in each of these 5 different topical areas. You've not been taken to that next level with system dynamics. That is to really explore what it's about and thereby learn something about the tool. So to the extent you can do that with this class project, that's good, because now you've added a 6th modeling and analysis tool to your repertoire, at least at some level, be it fairly not in depth, but at least you have an awareness of it, and that could be useful to you as you move forward in your career. The other reason that I strongly encourage it is that of all these tools that you've been exposed to here, this tool, the system dynamic, offers you perhaps the advantage or the best way to get into the modeling and analysis of these complex problems that we're facing, in particular with the neo-Luddites. And it also provides a framework by which you can indeed integrate some of these other tools, or at least the outputs from them. So that's why I'm strongly encouraging you to think about system dynamics as one of the 2 or more that you use. Not required. If you have other tools in your tool bags that you have learned over the years and you're using professionally, I'd be delighted to have you use those as well in this project if you think there's a use for them. But I want to reemphasize, any of the tools you bring to the table are not counted as part of the 2 that you should be using here. Those 2 need to be drawn from these 6. Now, let me go over once again what the deliverables are for this project. There are 2 things. First is a report in Word that articulates results. And the second is a presentation in PowerPoint that provides a briefing of this project. Let me give you an outline for the report, complete with page length. I want to stress this does not include the figures. I also want to say that, except for the cover page, the text of the report needs to be in 12-point font and single-spaced. And I've told you before why I've done that. Let me reiterate, I've had cases before where people, not just students, but other people who I've worked with professionally, tried to game the system by introducing larger fonts and triple spaces and so on. Don't do that here. Really looking for some substantive material, and it's fairly limited, only 10 pages. Now, if the text, the total page count grows to 20 because you've added graphics, that's wonderful. That's good. You should liberally use graphics throughout. But the content, the substance of your discussion should be contained in 10 pages without figures and using 12-point font and single space. Here's the way I suggest you think about allocation of your pages. First of all, the first page is a cover page, and it'll list the title of the project, the title of this class, you as the author, and the date. Then there'll be an executive summary immediately following that cover. Think about a half a page. Then an introduction. This gives you the motivation and the background. about a page. Then the approach. How did you go about coming up with a solution? That'll be 2 pages. The results, that's going to be the meat of what you've learned here. 4 pages of text. Then wrap it with a commentary. That's 2 pages. And I encourage you to think about a summary, some conclusions, and some recommendations. And those recommendations should be fairly carefully thought out, because in the real world, as many of you know, when you do a project, or an analytic project, or any sort of project, it's not necessarily a wrap at that point. You can simply walk away from some solution you've handed someone and say, well, that's it. From now to eternity, that solution will suffice. What's more common is that you're going to have to revisit that solution. Further, what's more common is that in developing the solution, you will have learned a lot, and through that learning process, you'll realize there are things that need to be done beyond what you've already done to make the system that you're trying to improve even better. So that recommendation section should be fairly carefully thought out. Then you can add as many appendices and page length there as you want. It's basically arbitrary. I encourage you to not just add things that you don't think add value to the text, but add appendices if you believe that helps the reader when going through there may be some points that you've made here, but you don't have the time or space, if you will, to include them in the text. They're very voluminous, a lot of calculations, for example, or spreadsheets or something. If you believe that they're important to have as part of this document you turn in, please include those as appendices. And let me reiterate that I'm encouraging you to use figures and graphics throughout this document. Figures are wonderful. They help people. They help their intuition. The other thing they're going to do is help you with the second deliverable, namely the PowerPoint file. The outline for the presentation, again, should be a 1-page, 1-slide title page. Provide an overview of the purpose and the results. 1 slide. Give us some background and motivation for the work. 1 slide. How did you approach the problem? 1 slide. What are the results? 4 slides. Here's where I would hope you would have a lot of graphics here. And then finally, commentary, the summary and conclusions, and the recommendations. So the presentation and the project Word file should really march hand in hand. The graphics that you use in the presentation should ideally be the same graphics you've used in your Word document. Much of the text you're going to use in the presentation are essentially summarizations of what you've written in the Word document. So there's not a whole lot of new work with the presentation, albeit it's really important to have it. So those are the 2 deliverables, the Word file and the presentation package. And once again, I'm going to encourage you to make very liberal use of graphics throughout those 10 slides. So the analytic framework I'm suggesting to help what I call jumpstart your project. First, the social movement theory influence diagram or systemic characterization. They're very closely related if you think about it. And I provided that to you in a separate lecture. I'm going to show it again in just a moment. The framework itself, the policy categories, I've given you those. I'm going to revisit those in more detail here in just a moment. I want you to think about the policy categories as being essentially part of the solution space. So you're to explore those different policy categories and define specific policies within each one of those categories that you believe will help solve this problem. The other is the quality of life categories. I'm giving you those, and I'm going to revisit those in just a moment as well. Those are like the objective function. Think about this, if you will, as an optimization problem. It's not, but it's in that same spirit. So these quality of life categories are the things that you want to improve upon. Clearly, as engineers, that's what we're about, developing technologies to improve the quality of life of people. What this will cause you to do is think as engineers at a sort of higher level than we typically do. When you think about improving quality of life and you think about policies that we can use to help improve that quality of life, only one of those is one that we typically focus on, that's technology development and deployment. But it's far broader than that, and that's the point I want to get at here. And to reemphasize, if we have any hope of influencing these neo-Luddites and the social movement to achieve our goals of improving the quality of life, then we have to understand this notion of what a social movement is and the effect that these different policy options have on not only the neo-Luddites, but also the bystanders and everyone else in this dynamic. So you have to think very, very broadly about the populations being affected by your policies, and I want you to think very broadly about both the quality of life and these policy categories and the inherent trade-offs that you're going to have. So talk about the objective function again. What is it we're trying to do here? We're trying to improve, enhance quality of life. Here are the fundamental dimensions I want you to focus on in your objective function. Human health, human rights. Some people refer to this as civil liberties. It's a little bit broader than that, but you can think of human rights and civil liberties as being very closely associated. The economic well-being of the citizenry in question, and that's both the neo-Luddites and everyone else. Environmental quality, the preservation of culture, and once again, it's not only the culture of the we might think of as the good guys, it's also the culture of the neo-Luddites. The availability of services. These are things like transportation, like electricity, water, and so on. And then finally, the confidence in the government. Confidence that the government can indeed help ensure the provision of these first 6 dimensions of quality of life. So what I want you to think about when you're thinking about your project and you're thinking about what it's all about in your objective, think about these 7 different dimensions as being, and try to think even further. How would you even measure human health? Is it mortality rates? Is it infant death rates? How would you measure human rights, cultural heritage preservation, economic well-being, and so on? Let me pick another, for example, on economic well-being. Is it disposable income per capita? Is an environmental quality? Is it something related to greenhouse gas loading? In human rights, is it something related to a suppression of freedom of speech? In cultural heritage preservation, are there specific sites that the population has that they believe are very important to their culture and they should be maintained and not damaged? In availability of services, does everyone have sufficient level of electricity and water and so on? And confidence in government. This is a different sort of beast, but there are ways to get at measures of that. Things like polls and things like protests and so on and so forth. But I want you to think about these 7 different dimensions, at least some portion of those being literally a part of your objective function that you're trying to improve for all parties engaged. So those are factors that influence social movements. Now the policy categories. So these are the things, these are your controls. These are things you can do to help achieve those improvements in quality of life. Regulations, fiscal incentives, information, education, outreach, technology development and deployment, inter and intra-organizational relations, enforcement. So here what I want you to think about is trying to achieve these overall improvements in quality of life in those 7 different dimensions I just showed you, what are things we can imagine doing in one or more of these 6 categories? If you hit all 6, great. And also I want you to think about this. For each category, it's possible there's more than one thing that one might do. So, for example, in regulations, you could, in fact, impose some regulations about, say, a curfew, we'll say. So people can't be out on the streets after such and such, 6 o'clock at night because of danger. That would be a regulation. It's also connected to the last one there, enforcement. If you're going to have a regulation, are you indeed going to enforce it? How will you enforce it? Will you have the National Guard out there making sure the streets are clear? Let's see, another regulation I can imagine might be in introducing, say, new technologies into the marketplace. If you were to drill down and ask the neo-Luddites a bit more about, so why are they so resistant to new technologies? Conceivably, there's something about, well, in our opinion, there have been technologies introduced that were damaging to our environment. Well, if that's the case, then perhaps there should be a regulatory function that does more careful examination of products before they're released for consumption. And again, you can see a connection to enforcement there. How do you police that? See, the second category, fiscal incentives. You can imagine taxes that you could impose. You can imagine subsidies that you can provide. Both those are examples of fiscal incentives. Now, the question for you is, so how would you tax people to achieve this end? How would you, what sort of fiscal subsidies would you provide to achieve some improvement? Again, I'm just offering these as things for you to think about. The third one, information, education, and outreach. That goes back to, do you want to put something out in the public media, say on public service radio or NPR, public service television? Do you want to put some sort of flyers out? Do you want to offer classes at the local community college to people? All about this business about how do we accommodate one another in this world where we have people who are pro-technologists and people who are anti-technology. But so information, education, outreach doesn't sound like much, but my experience has been that's one where you can get maybe the most bang for your buck. It's fairly inexpensive to do those kinds of things. Yet the whole notion about educating people so they can at least come to a level of dialogue among one another have been shown to be extremely valuable in a variety of different stressful situations. The fourth one there, technology development and deployment. Well, this is what engineers really like to do. That's what we're all about. That's where 99.9% of our education or interest lies, which is great. There's technology development and it's what it's always been about for me personally. But clearly, there's more to policy portfolio than just that. But let's focus on that for just a moment. Technology development and deployment. So, question here about a policy decision would be. The government has a finite number of dollars, fiscal resources that it can spend on research and development. So the question would be, how does the government optimally allocate those research and development dollars? That's a policy decision. So that's an example of what I would encourage you to think about when you think about that category. Inter and intra-organizational relations. So how did the management structure of the neo-Luddite movement interface with the management structure, the leadership structure of the pro-technologists? Is there an interface there? Do they dialogue at all? Well, that's what that's about. Also about, say, within the neo-Luddite movement, the leadership and the management, how do they communicate with one another? And similarly with the pro-technologists, how do they within their management structure communicate? Maybe there are things that can be done to improve all those dimensions of these relations. The last one I've mentioned a couple of times, and that's enforcement. How do you actually, what's the policy for enforcing regulations and other sort of aspects of trying to manage these Neo-Luddites? So I hope that helps you. I want you to think about your objective function being drawn from those 6 different dimensions of quality of life. Think about measures for each of those. You don't necessarily have to use all 6, but think about it. And think about your policies coming from these, well, I guess there were 7 over there. Think about your policies coming from one or more of these 6 categories. You don't necessarily have to use all 6, but think about it. Let's see, back to the point about the quality of life, the 7 different dimensions there. The reason it's important for you to do due diligence on all 7 of those is I've seen over and again well-meaning people develop and implement policies that was really focused on one category over there. Perhaps it's environmental quality. Perhaps it's economics. And that's all well and good. But in so doing, there were unintended consequences that had negative impacts on one or more of the other quality of life dimensions. That's why it's important to look holistically across all 7 of these with any of those policy options that you choose to move forward with. The other thing, back over to the policy side, I encourage you to think holistically here because I've seen again that there are cases where people proposed a policy and it was at odds with another policy that was already on the books to address these quality of life things on the other side. So it's really important for you to understand the whole landscape of policies and the interplay among those policies as they translate over into impacts on your quality of life. Not a trivial problem. Now a word here, which makes the point I was just trying to make. This is one of the more famous parables that Confucius used to talk with his disciples about. One day, his students and he passed a grave where they saw a woman weeping at a gravestone. She told Confucius that her husband's father, and her son were killed by a tiger. When Confucius asked her why she didn't leave such a fated spot, she answered that in this place there is no oppressive government. Confucius said, "Remember this, my child, an oppressive government is fiercer and more feared than a tiger." I wanted to put that out there for you because one of the concerns that people in sociology in particular, and political science, and social psychology have is when we invoke these policies and we impact quality of life, quite often it can be quite negative because of the feeling, in fact, the feeling may be true, that the government actions are in fact oppressive. They're suppressing freedom of speech or whatever. So we have to be very careful that we don't get into this tiger syndrome here in developing these policies. That's why I want to go back and reinforce again. Look across all 7 of those quality of life dimensions when you suggest any policy, and ensure that if there is a negative impact over there on any one of those, you're at least aware of it, acknowledge it, and are trying to think about ways to sort of mitigate that negative impact. Okay, social movement theory, just to revisit. I looked at a systemic characterization, if you will. These were the domain elements that generally arise. There's resource mobilization, opportunity constraints, and there's the framing process. I described those in detail in a previous lecture. If you go back to Professor Hochstetler's lecture, I believe it was lecture 8, She spent an entire lecture describing social movement theory to you. That'll be important to your class project. Now, the analytic framework I'm suggesting, hopefully you'll understand at this point, we have the social movement theory kernel in the middle there. And that's just all I've shown here is a very compressed version of that one graphic that I gave you earlier in our lecture. There are things that happen that influence the social movement that are not caused by people per se, caused by environmental stresses. That's what's shown here on the top. Then there are things that are induced by the people, anthropogenically induced stress. These are the neo-Luddites. So what are we doing? Well, we've got these controls out there that I've now gone through with you in some depth, regulations through enforcement. So somehow we want to impact the social dynamic in this social movement theory kernel, if you will, to achieve improvements in quality of life. So if you would think in this context, when you're thinking about your project, this is really what I'm looking for. We have social movement theory as a characterization of the neo-Luddite social movement. What we want to do is deal with that movement so that we achieve an improvement, or at least no lessening in quality of life for everyone based on these different dimensions. And the tools that we have to use are on the left-hand side here, the regulations through the enforcement. So if you would continue to think in this context as you move into your project, I think it'll be valuable to you. Now, some background materials. Let me say again, this was related to a question, one of the questions I got from a student recently about the exam. The question was, so I don't remember reverse reductionism. Where do we talk about that? Well, we talked about that way back in Lecture 2, where we talked about reductionism and reverse reductionism. It was also brought up again in your intelligent agents lecture, where there was a relationship between reverse reductionism, if you will, and emergent behavior. The classical systems engineering was introduced to you way back in Lecture 3. What I'm encouraging you to do in this class project is think about at least those first two stages, defining the problem and designing the solution. And then the modeling and analysis tools, those are largely Module 2, and I believe those lectures 11 through 22 where we hit those. I'll have to add to that lecture 23, if you will, and 24, where we added another modeling and analysis tool, namely the system dynamics. So a lot of lectures in all the lectures in Module 2, plus the first couple of lectures in Module 3 here. Now let me hit more specifically on how we might jumpstart your project. The Exam 2 was purposely designed to help jumpstart you into your class project. What we did there was for each of those 5 topical areas, system of systems analysis tool set, the intelligent agents, the risk analysis, decision analysis, and game theory. For each of those, we gave you an exam problem that caused you to think about policy, essentially. We didn't call it necessarily policy, but it caused you to think about policy and impact on quality of life. Let me go through those in turn. Before we got into to the SOSAT world and Module 2 even, way back in Module 1, what we did was essentially build a system of systems for detecting those command-wired detonated IEDs that were put out by the neo-Luddites. And so the policy category there was essentially that of technology development and deployment. We're developing a new technology, namely the detection system, the system of systems. On the other side of the framework, what were we trying to influence with that? Well, clearly in the quality of life, human health. By detecting those command-wired detonated IEDs sufficiently and far in advance, we could cut back on injuries and deaths associated with them. So it falls into the category of a human health effect. Also, economic well-being. By putting those IEDs out along I-25, the neo-Luddites were disrupting commerce. By disrupting commerce, that is impairing our economic well-being, if you will. A third is our cultural heritage preservation. There again, they were putting those IEDs out. We have a variety of different cultural sites that we like to visit in a vacation sense, or just to visit the site because we have a connection to it of some sort. Well, it was impairing our ability to do that even. Availability of services. One of the services, of course, being that of transportation, moving from point A to point B. Well, clearly, it had a negative. The IEDs had a negative impact on that. So anything we can do in this technology development or deployment sense with detecting those things that could help in one or more of these categories could presumably be a good thing, at least for that portion of the population that was impacted by these. So that's a clear connection. That's a jump start that you can use in your class project. Okay, now let's get into SOSAT Module 2. Really what that was about, the part of it in the exam, was exploring the effectiveness, if you will, the reliability of a system that would, for detecting the IEDs. And so the SOSAT was essentially simulating how to keep the detection system up and running. You know, that's the reliability aspect of it. Well, clearly the policy category there again is technology development and deployment. That's a system for maintaining and enhancing the reliability of that detection system. And once again, those quality of life categories are precisely the ones I just talked through above: human health, economics, cultural heritage preservation, and the availability of services. So with the SOSAT example that you have on the exam 2, there's another thing that you could build into your class project if you so chose, and elaborate on it, and again federate it with one of the other tools. One of those being intelligent agents. Let me tell you how that relates. Well, the policy category there, one of them that was clear to me was primarily the intra-organizational relationships. If you read carefully exam 2, problem 2, you'll see that's what it was about. And the categories of quality of life that were impacted were civil liberties or human rights and cultural heritage preservation. There may indeed be others I don't list here. Those are the ones that jump at me, though. Once again, now you could use results that you got from your exam 2 and problem 2, grow it, enhance it, federate it. You got a jump start. The third category, the third problem I should say, was that of risk analysis. You were explicitly asked in that third problem to identify policy options for managing or mitigating risks. So it didn't pick one. It gave you essentially a suite of policy categories there. And in the quality of life categories, it cut across many. You're talking about consequences and the risk. And you were even asked to develop specific metrics for those categories. So I'll submit to you here again, you have a jump start in your class project if you elect to choose the work you did in the risk analysis, again, and expand upon it and federate it. Fourth problem, decision analysis. And that was determining the optimal strategy for developing policy portfolios or managing the social movement. That was the smitten problem. Well, clearly, that was by design included all 6 policy categories. That's what's embedded in that policy portfolio question. And once again, clearly, since we're managing a policy portfolio, it'll include all 7 categories. Now, we didn't get explicit with that problem. Nevertheless, this problem did show you an approach to choosing whether or not to go off for more sample data or to try to sell the policy portfolio as is. So once again, if you wanted to take that problem or expand upon it, enrich it, federate it, you've got a jump start. The fifth problem, some game theory, covert arms race. Well, the policy category there clearly is primarily in the technology and development and deployment category. But once again, the quality of life categories cuts across all 7 of those ones that I've given you. So I'll just say again, if you choose to take that covert arms race, expand on it, enrich it, federate it, you've got a jump start in your class project. The other thing I want to bring up again is I don't recall the lecture. It was back around 9 or so. What I did there was to bring to you a systemic characterization of social movement theory, and indeed this is a causal loop diagram developed in the software that I'll be talking about in a little bit. So you essentially have a jump start with this into that entity we think of as the social dynamic that characterized by social movement theory. So you're certainly welcome and encouraged if you think it's going to be valuable to you. To begin with this, you may want to enhance it. You may want to cut part of it out and focus, for example, on the framing process or opportunities constraints. Do it any way you will, but whatever you choose, you do have a jump start here. So I guess my point of all this is the project, writ large, without all this other background material for you, it was quite daunting. But if you were to take any 2 or more of these things that I've talked in the last few minutes and simply build on them, enrich them, enhance them, federate them, you've got a significant leg up and jump start in your project. Okay, another question I got on the internet about this project was, so remind me again what the project definition is, the problem. So I'm trying to do that again here. I've elaborated a bit more on it here. We will assume that the radical behavior employed by the Neo-Luddites to implement their social movement is less than desirable for collective society. I don't think anybody would argue with that. The overall problem that we have is to determine a policy portfolio that will result in outcomes that improve the overall quality of life of the collective society, including the Neo-Luddites. So that's about as far as I can take you down the path of clarification, elaboration, definition of the problem statement. So I want you to use your own creative abilities beyond this. If you want to refine that more, fine, tell me what it is, but let's just leave it at that for now. Okay. Then I had some other things, and that's an email about some direction that was sought. So I wanted to share it with everyone. So let me give you these 6 different bullets. First of all, your solution should be a portfolio of policy options drawn from the policy categories that I provided during Lecture 22, and I just went over in detail in this lecture. The second one, the value of your solution should be characterized in the context of the quality of life categories that I also provided during Lecture 22, and I've elaborated in much more detail here today. Third, you should use social movement theory, and there was an overview provided in Lecture 8 by Professor Hochstetter, and a systemic characterization I provide in Lecture 22 again. Use that to ensure you've captured the salient aspects of this large-scale, complex, adaptive, intelligent, wicked system. Fourth point, to explore your solution space, you should use at least 2 of the 6 modeling and analysis tools, and that includes those 5 different tools you're exposed to in Module 2, and or the systems dynamics. So you got 6 different tool sets to choose from there. You should use both reductionism and reverse reductionism. Those were discussed in Lecture 2 in creating your solution. And finally, you should ensure that you've considered at least the early stages of the classical systems engineering paradigm as discussed back in Lecture 3. in articulating your approach. And by that I mean the first two stages in particular. Stage one is define the problem. Stage two is design the solution. Okay, so we've been through the class project again. I hope I've helped. I hope that I've cleared up some of your questions. I do want to encourage you, if you have any other ones, don't hesitate to email me, ask them, and I'll try to respond, try to answer them for you. But I think you're in good shape with all the jump starts I've given you here. Okay, now let's shift back into system dynamics, and I want to focus for the next few minutes on stocks and flows. You recall our last lecture, we went through the causal loop diagrams. That's chapter 5 in your text. The emphasis in stocks and flows, that is throughout the text as well as causal loops, but the intro for stocks and flows is chapter 6, and that's what I want to lead you in through now. First of all, there's terminology that changes depending on the discipline you're in. This shouldn't be any surprise to you. But in fields like mathematics and physics and our own engineering, the stocks are states, state variables, integrals. The flows are derivatives. It's a rate of change of the flows. And that's literally what you're seeing in the system dynamics paradigm. You have variables and you have derivatives of those variables. The differentials are literally on the arcs. So you really have in a system dynamics context, you really have a coupled set of differential equations. Typically, they're nonlinear differential equations. They may not be stiff, but the point is, when you've represented this thing, you have a coupled set of nonlinear differential equations, typically. In chemistry, the stocks are reactants and reaction products, and the flows are the reaction rates. In manufacturing, we have inventories and buffers, and the flow is the throughput. In economics, they talk about levels and rates. They're fairly closely akin to stocks and flows. In accounting, they talk about stocks and balance sheet items, and the flows are cash flow or income statement items. In biology and physiology, we have compartments, we have diffusion rates on the flow side, and finally in medicine and epidemiology, the stocks are prevalence and reservoirs, and the flows are incidence, infection, morbidity, and mortality rates. Point being here is we have a lot of different terminologies as you go bounce from discipline to discipline, everything from math to biology and physiology and so on. And indeed, there are a lot of applications in the social sciences. System dynamics has been around for a long time, 60 plus years, and it's been shown to be fairly robust and useful in a variety of these different contexts. So although different disciplines use different terms, the underlying foundation and structure for doing analysis is consistent and unchanging. Okay, so let's get into first of all, we want to be able to build diagrams. So what's the terminology you're going to be using here? First of all, stocks. They're going to be represented by rectangles, and this suggests a container holding the contents of the stock. Flows. We're going to have inflows that are represented by pipes or arrows that point into the stock, so they're adding to the stock. We're going to have outflows. They're also represented by pipes pointing out of the stock or subtracting from the stock. Now we're going to have valves. The valves control the flow. And we're going to have clouds. These clouds represent the sources and the sinks for the flow. And a source represents the stock from which a flow originating outside the boundary of the model arises. Remember that notion of boundary is creeping back in here again. In contrast, sinks represent the stocks into which flows leaving the model boundary drain. Sources and sinks are assumed to have infinite capacity and can never constrain the flows they support. So with those four different terminological concepts, you essentially have the essence of what you need to create a system dynamics model using these stocks, flows, the fundamentals, the valves, and the clouds. So what does that mean symbolically? Symbols, first, a stock, it's just a rectangle. A flow, just an arrow. The valve, that's a typical signal for a valve, and a source or a sink is the cloud. When you put those together, it looks like this. So in the far left there, we have a source or a sink of something that's going to be flowing. That flow rate is controlled by the inflow valve. That's going to increase the stock, and it's going to flow out at the other side. There's an outflow rate controlled by another valve and a sink. Remember, both the source and the sink are infinite. No limitations there. Limitations are the constraints are totally in control by the symbology inside, the valves, the capacity of the stock, and flow rates. So those are the symbols. With that, there are essentially four equivalent representation of a stock and flow structure. First one, it's used quite often to introduce the concept, is this hydraulic metaphor where you have a bathtub. And the bathtub has a faucet. And there's this infinite source of water out there, presumably. And you open the spigot, if you will, turn the valve, and you can adjust the rate of flow of the water into the bathtub. The bathtub is the reservoir, and the water rises as the flow increases into it. At the other end, you have a drain. There's a valve on that. You can control the rate of the water draining out of the tub. It's going off into another infinite sink, if you will. So it's useful to think in terms of that metaphor as you build your stock and flow diagram. It's like a bathtub there, and you've got in fact, you may have several different input streams controlled by different valves, and several different output streams controlled by different valves. But fundamentally, it's the same simplistic picture. What does that mean in terms of what we're going to be using? Well, this is the stock and flow diagram we've already talked through. But you can see the relationship between the hydraulic and the stock and flow diagram, hopefully now. If you're a lover of mathematics, there's the integral equation, and that's equivalent to the hydraulic metaphor and the stock and flow diagram. Here what you're doing is integrating over some time frame, the inflow less the outflow, plus the stock at a previous time step. So the new stock is simply the integral, inflow minus outflow plus the previous stock level. Or if you're still this mathematician and you like the differential side of the equation, here we go. The rate of change of the stock, with respect to time, is really the net change in the stock. That's simply the inflow minus the outflow. So those are all equivalent representations of the same phenomenon we're trying to articulate here. Now, get into the software per se. I'm going to have to take. Okay, so if you'll take out your text and you open it up to the back cover, you'll notice that there's a CD, a little pocket back there. Take that out, load it into your system. And what you'll see when you do that is you'll have essentially three different software packages that you can pick and choose from. There's one called iThink, one called VinSim, and there's a third one called PowerSim. Historically, the way those things came about, there were a lot of people, Apple, Macintosh kind of users, that were into system dynamics, and iThink was developed specifically for the Apple. For years, it would not run on an IBM platform. That's now been changed. You can now run iThink on just virtually any kind of platform. In contrast, the VinSim and the PowerSim were developed for the conventional IBM PC platform. The way they evolved over the years was PowerSim took on more and more of a kind of a power number crunching flavor, while VinSim stayed more into let me just call it a user-friendly world, where you try to use it to teach high school, grade school, elementary school children even. Far more, let me just say this, the causal loop diagram structure, ability to do that in VinSim is superior, in my judgment, to the PowerSim world, while the PowerSim power, if you will, the number crunching capability and so on is superior to the VinSim. What I've done here, I have all three. What I've in things that I've done historically, I typically go the PowerSim route because I'm just familiar with that. I have done a lot of iThink modeling historically, but the VinSim's a good tool. So and you can get that off the web, by the way. In contrast to PowerSim or iThink, VinSim is freeware. You can download if you so choose. You don't need to do that because you've got it on a disk here. So let's I'm going to bring up VinSim, and what I want to do first of all is just show you. All I want to do is expose you to the user's manual. I don't think it's time well spent for me to try to go through this the process of showing you how to explicitly build a model here. I think the most efficient way to do that is for you to go through the open VinSim after you download all the files, open up Help, open up the VinSim manuals, and here you'll see a variety of manuals that are available to you. What I encourage you to do is open up the user's guide, and you're certainly welcome to go through the introduction and the user interface, but you really get into the meat when you get down into the hands-on example that's shown here. So let me jump down there. Okay, so the first thing you'll see in the hands-on example, it tells you what's contained here, and this is fairly easy to page through. You just go back up here to these little arrow page marks, click on it, and it'll go to the next page. But all this is doing up front is kind of setting you up with what are the capabilities of VinSim that they're going to tell you about in this particular module. What they're going to do is pick up on what they're calling the workforce inventory example. Here they talk you through how to work through this one particular example and sort of the richness, if you will, of the modeling tool. How to build it comes later. So here what they're doing is telling you how to open it up. I already have it open back there. And this is what you would see when you open the model. Okay, it tells you how to open the model. You simply go to File, Open Model, and it tells you which one to open. This is the workforce inventory model. And as I said, I had that sort of built in. Let's see. Gary, we're going to have to take a pause here. Okay, so we had a little small technical glitch, now corrected. So back to the point, we're in VinSim tutorial, and we're looking at a particular model that's provided to you in the tutorial. This is the one shown here, the workforce inventory model, and they just want to show you a few capabilities that we have here. So this is what you should see. Let me scroll down a little bit more here. This is what you should see when you open up that particular file. Now, what are some of the capabilities? Well, one capability that they're showing you here is that we can represent the flow, if you will, the causes, what they call arrow causes, the variable to change. So if we pick, for example, the inventory variable, and we can go in and change variables and put the inventory variable on what they call the workspace by simply double-clicking it, and then click on an analysis tool they call in Vensim, they call the causes tree diagram. So let me go to model per se. You can see right now, if you look at the top of the bar there, you see the workforce. That's the variable on the workbench there. If I go to inventory and I double click it, you notice that changed up there. So keep your eye up here on this bar. You see the word inventory there? Let me click again in workforce. Now watch the inventory word as I change it. Changed to workforce. Well, let's put inventory back up there. So I'm going to double click here, and you watch that bar at the top. It'll change from workforce to inventory. It did that. Now suppose I want to know something about this tree structure. Well, let me go up here to the cause tree. I put the little cursor over the top one there. It says cause tree, and let me just click that. And it draws out for you then the cause tree for inventory. Now what that equates to, if you'll look at this tree and compare it with this diagram up here, see, you notice that inventory is directly connected to production. That's on the valve here, and if you put let your little cursor hover over the word production there, it will indeed show you the dimensions in a call out below it. It's in this widgets per month, we'll say. But the point here in this causes tree is that production causes inventory. It has a cause effect on inventory. And then if you look at production, what has a cause effect on that? Well, one thing is workforce, see the connection there, and the other is productivity. Draw that again. Didn't mean to take that off. Okay, so two things cause production, which in turn causes yeah. Gotta be careful what I'm doing here. I'm moving it around very well. Okay. Now the other thing is sales. Sales has a causal effect on inventory as well, as you can imagine, because as you adjust the sales rate, that in the bathtub metaphor, you're opening the drain more, that inventory level is going to drop precipitously. Okay. Now, what else is he telling us in this in this help? Okay, the other is the uses tree. So let's leave inventory up there, and let's go back and build us a uses tree. Okay, inventory is still up there. You see at the top, just below the causes tree is a uses tree. So what uses inventory? Well, one thing is inventory correction. You see this arrow coming out here. And the next thing is target production. The reason you're seeing the way Vensim is arranged, it goes a two-step depth. So since target production is only 2 steps away from inventory, it's shown here. If there were anything else that were 2 steps away, it would be shown as well, but there isn't anything, so it's not shown. So you're getting the idea about the tutorial. Fairly easy to use. Let me see what else they have here. Okay. Well, you can see I don't use this much. Okay, so we were examining the structure. Okay, another nice feature here is examining the loops. So what they're suggesting here is pick on the higher rate, the net higher rate, which is one of the variables, and then understand what the loops are that connect that. You remember, if you have positive feedback loops, that shows the exponential growth, negative is decay, and so on. And if you had delays in there, you get oscillatory behavior. So let's look. Let me see if I can make this happen. Let's look at the loop analysis. And it was for net higher rate, I think it was. So again, if you'll focus your attention, you see at the top of the bar, we previously selected inventory. I want to change that to net higher rate, so I'm going to double click that. Now you see that changed up there to net higher rate. Now the loop is over here on the left side, just below the uses tree. There's the loops. So let's just click that. And this displays the loops now for, let me move it down a little bit more if I can without erasing it, for net higher rate. So it shows two loops. The first one only has a length of 1. So if we start with net higher rate and we look at workforce, see net higher rate goes over to workforce, which comes directly back into net higher rate. So that's loop 1. And now it's telling me that was pretty obvious. This one may be less obvious. Now there's another loop with net higher rate, and it has a length 6. So what is it? Well, net higher rate starts there. Gosh, didn't mean to do that. These things are sensitive. So let's see if I can try again here. I'm going to talk you through it rather than move the pointer, because I may mess it up again. So let's start with net higher rate. Go to workforce. You can see that to the left. Now from workforce, let's go up to production. You see that above. And there's an arrow going up there. From production, we go into inventory. You can see that. Let me lower this a little bit so you can see that loop. Bring this up again. Okay, so we got to inventory. Out of inventory, we come into inventory correction. You see that loop, the arrow coming out of the top of inventory, going over to the far right at inventory correction. From inventory correction, we leave there and go into target production. From target production, we go into target workforce, and target workforce goes directly back into net higher rate. Now that becomes important because therein lies a coupled set, probably a coupled set of nonlinear differential equations we're connecting here. And therein also lies the impact of positive and feedback loops. All those are very important concepts. So this notion of being able to trace the loops it can give you a lot of insights into system dynamics. Okay, so what else do they have? Okay, well, keep going to the wrong scroll bar. Okay, now they've got another output window they're talking about. It's the documentation window. And so we'll go over and open documentation now. It's, as I recall, just under the loops. Yeah, there it is. So let's open documentation. And here, what this is doing is showing you the variables and the values and their units and so on. So we're going to run this simulation the way they've set it here for 100 time units, where a time unit is a month. We're going to start it at time 0. Initially, we're going to have an inventory, which is an integer value, which is production minus sales. It's going to have units of widgets. We're going to have an inventory correction, which is target inventory minus the inventory. You can see those in the diagram above. And the time to correction comes out of that. The units are going to be in widgets per month. Again, if you hover over any of those, it'll show you the units. The inventory coverage is 3. New higher rate. That's the target workforce minus the workforce divided by time to adjust the workforce. That's persons per month. Production is the workforce time to productivity. And you can see where that comes in over here, if I can do it without messing things up. Productivity down here, and so you put those two together, you get production. Productivity, workforce. We have an initial value for productivity of 1. We have sales initially set to 100 plus this step function, and so on. I won't talk you through all those, but you get the idea. If you open up the documents, you get all the details that you need and more probably about the model parameters, the nominal values, and their dimensions. Okay. So now what they're suggesting down here is to close all output. So let's go up and do that. That's up in the Windows command. Close all output. All right. Back to the help. I hope you're getting the idea. It's really quite simple just to step through these tutorials. So what I really encourage you to do at this point is to do just that. You're talking about probably a couple of hours time investment. You need to get through the tutorial that shows you how to build the causal loops, that shows you how to build the stock and flow, shows you how to simulate. They're all right here. And my guess is that you'll be able to get through all that certainly in 2 or 3 hours. Fairly straightforward. So with that, I'm gonna leave it up to you. Load your. I encourage you to use VinSim. It's probably the easiest of the ones to get through, and it has all the capabilities you're going to need. You don't need to worry about power crunching and so on. Load it up and start building your examples in here, and keep in the back of your mind if you want to use System Dynamics and VinSim in the class projects. It's going to be a valuable tool for you. And it's also going to be valuable in the future when you're out there working to know more about what System Dynamics can do for you. So I really encourage you to think seriously about including it in your class project, along with at least one of the other 5 that are available to you to get this federation construct trained out of the way. If you have any further questions about the class project, please don't hesitate to email me. I'll try to respond as quickly as I can. As most of you are probably aware, we had some significant problems with the email service at New Mexico State over the last week or so, but I think that has now been corrected, so hopefully there won't be any communications problems at this point. Good luck to you, and I'll see you again at the next lecture.